Welcome back to the Speaking and Communicating podcast. I am your host, Roberta. If you are looking to improve your communication skills, both professionally and personally, this is the podcast you should be tuning into. And by the end of this episode, please remember to subscribe, give a rating and a review. Remember that on this podcast, our focus is communication, and today's guest is going to talk to us not only about TV and film industries and the storytelling methods that we can learn from it, but also intercultural communications. Before I go any further and talk to Douglas MacLeod, who is in upstate New York, he is an associate professor of communication at Cobleskill, New York University. Let me introduce him. Hi, Doug. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Roberta. How are you?
I'm doing good. Good to have you here.
Good to be here. Good to be here.
So before we talk about all your credentials, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Just, personal. My name is Doug MacLeod. I'm a associate professor of composition and communication over at SUNY Cobleskill. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. Lived there a good portion of half of my life, and then moved to upstate New York back in 2001, just prior to 9/11, in fact. Then I was adjuncting at multiple institutions back in 2008. I had gone for my doctoral degree in 2001 and graduated in 2008 with what's called a DA in humanistic studies, a doctoral degree. That's more of a teaching degree as opposed to a research degree.
Okay.
With that said, though, I've grown to become someone who enjoys research quite a bit, and I do a lot of publishing, and conferences. So I've been at SUNY Cobleskill since 2013 as a professor. I started there, though, in 2008 as a tutor and worked my way up from there. So, my wife and I have been living up in Cobleskill for about 11 years or so at this point, and we've been married for 21 years.
Wow, people don't stay married that long anymore.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Power of communication.
There we go. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. So I don't know if I'm the only one, but I'm not sure if a lot of us are familiar with what Cobleskill, the institution, what it does, what it's about. Would you like to tell us more about that?
Sure. SUNY Cobleskill is a more of a rural college. It's a college of technology and agriculture, but their major focus is agriculture. So what they do is often most of their classes are fisheries and wildlife sorts of courses. They do equine therapy, dairy management. We live about 40 minutes away from Albany, west of Albany. It's a very rural area with a lot of farmland. And so our particular college is a very small one, but it's a tight-knit one. It's a community kind of college. Even though it's not a community college, but it is a community college. We have bachelor's degrees as well as associate's degrees. As I said, it's a rural college. We've got about between 2,000 and 2,500 students at our institution, most of which going into agriculture. So, but we do have some degrees within the humanities and liberal arts, one of which is a communications degree, which is, something I teach. So,
right. Just one thing, when it comes to the focus of the institution, I think a lot of us are becoming more aware of how important those are, because we've become so accustomed to all these white collar degrees and office jobs that we aspire to, that the blue collar degrees, so to speak, or the blue collar skills, we live by those. You can have a corner office on the 50th floor of a building, but who's going to do your plumbing and your electricity? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I
Mm,
absolutely agree. Where the trades are very important. But what's interesting about our college is that, as I said, a lot of our stuff is based on farming. And let's face it, who's the person who is ensuring that we get fed day by
mm,
day? And it's a fundamental, and our school is very much trying to accommodate that, right? And very profound sorts of ways. They're trying to feed the state, the country, the world.
yeah,
And so we don't put a lot of emphasis on our farmers and how important they are. So I'm going to throw that out there right now. I think we need to. I mean, we have to
mhm,
give them a lot of credit for what they do to help
for,
us survive.
for sure. Just don't take for granted when you see your apples and your potatoes at Walmart. Remember where they come from. Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
So, talk to us about, before we get into digital empathy specifically, let's just talk in general about communication, since you're a communications professor. What are
Mhm.
some of the key things that are important when it comes to communications for us as humans?
I think at this point, if there was one thing I would say that is important for communication or how we go about communicating with one another is understanding. I think we need to have a fundamental idea of how we treat one another and how we need to treat with one another. I think we need caring. I tell my students oftentimes that what's going to be our downfall as a civilization is apathy and indifference. And I think that since we have this kind of thought processes of I don't care, whatever whatever happens, happens. I don't care what I say, how I say it, who I say it to. Uh, we're going to run into major issues, and we're seeing that day by day from my perspective. So I would say caring and understanding, I think, is key to good communication. It has to be there. If you're
Mm-hmm.
if you're apath- if you're indifferent or apathetic towards the person that you're speaking with, then it's not a dialogue, right? It's
Because
not
they
a
are
dialogue.
speaking by themselves. Yeah.
Right. It's more of just two monologues,
Mm.
and talking at each other as opposed to really kind of delving into the complexities of whatever issues are taking place between those two individuals, right? So yeah, so I would say understanding and caring
Mm-hmm.
need to be need to be there. Absolutely.
They say that human beings have the need to be seen, heard, and validated. And what you just said about just having being apathetic is literally the complete opposite of that. So
Right.
if I don't
Right.
care about what you say and how you feel, I'm basically not living up to those needs, the seen, heard, and validated. So at the same time, do I expect that in return from you? If I'm gonna just not care, so
Right.
that means I must be okay with other people treating me the same way when I'm expressing my feelings and needing them to care.
Right. The problem with that though is that if more than likely if you're speaking to, it depends on whether or not you're caring or not or understanding. If you're apathetic and indifferent like that other person is, then there's no care at all. You know what I mean? Like you're saying, do you expect that to come back to me, right? Or you expect me to care about what you're saying? The fact is more than likely you don't feel that way, right?
Mm.
That's where the concern lies, is that are we just a bunch of individuals who are going through life just to go through life? Or are we trying to develop the relationships that we have, or develop more relationships in the hopes that it could lead to something more fruitful? I don't know if that's I don't know if that's taking place. I'm concerned about that anyway. I'm very concerned about that.
Mm,
So
mm.
what you were saying before about the idea of, I'm feeling, I want to get what I'm not giving you. I don't think if that person doesn't care, that person doesn't care, right? I mean, it just
So they
boils
don't
down
care
to it.
with not receiving it either anyway.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, it's just
You
like
just don't care overall.
I don't care overall. Right. Right.
Hmm.
You know. So I think that's from my perspective anyway.
And you mentioned that in your institution you have, students from other cultures, and you do talk
Yeah.
about intercultural communications. If
Mhm.
I find myself dealing with someone from a different culture, what are 2 or 3 things that I should be cognizant of in order to sort of break down those barriers and be able to communicate with that person?
I think what you need to do is educate yourself about that specific culture. Now, the thing about that is that you can't learn everything about one particular culture, right? And I mean, it's an impossibility. But the idea is to maybe learn about some of the fundamental aspects of the language, the customs, uh, an understanding of, and this plays into it. The idea I had said, understanding, right? So it plays
Mm-hmm.
into that. Understanding a little bit more about how they relate to family and how they uh, their customs as it pertains to food and as opposed and music and culture, right?
Mm.
I think just trying to find basics as a starting point, and then you could start to build on those particular basics. The problem is now we're so saturated with so much stuff that it becomes an issue. We're saturated with so much information. This is a problem too. I'm sorry. I sometimes jump around a lot. I
No,
think
that's
oftentimes, um, but I think what happens is oftentimes is that we don't necessarily even know if the information is real or not, right? I
that's
mean,
a big one lately. Yes.
yeah, yeah, right. So if we're trying to learn something about somebody else and we learn something that's not real, how does that play a role in it? I'm sorry, I've jumped into a different world. What I would say is try to find information. Going back to your question,
Mm-hmm.
try to find information. Try to become educated, making sure that you find credible, reliable sources to be able to do that, and making sure that you do care and understand those particular individuals. It's amazing because we're all human beings, right? I mean, it's a cliche kind of statement sometimes, but that's what it is, right? We are all human beings. So what makes us happy will make someone else happy in another country, or another area of the world.
Mm.
So so I think that's what it is. Learn the fundamentals, know the fundamentals, learn uh, some of the details that you can, and this is important. I think keeping an open mind, right?
Yes.
That's key. If you keep an open mind about what you're experiencing, and say, okay, you know what, I'm learning, right? Being
Mm-hmm.
open to learning is very, very significant. So that's how I kind of see it.
I fully agree with you on that. And speaking of keeping an open mind, I'm a South African. And when I went to
Mhm.
South Korea, I spent the last decade in South Korea teaching English, and now I've been in the US for 2 years. I
Mhm.
find that I am most likely to hear something that potentially, okay, I don't get offended anymore. Otherwise, I'd be gray. I, I find that if somebody says something that we can term ignorant, usually not only did they not seek information as you suggested, but they come to me with an assumption.
Mm.
So if you come
Mhm.
to me and you say,
Mhm.
oh, you're from South Africa, I was in Lagos last year, how far do you live from there? uh, a passport and a 10-hour flight away. What exactly is your point? So whereas if you One, it's so much, anybody who asks me a question, I like that person way more, and I'm most likely to have a conversation with them because they want to know. And I don't, those of us from different cultures, if we meet someone from a different country, it's better to ask the question rather than to come, because once you come with an assumption, I'm mostly pissed off by the time you even start to ask the question afterwards. Whereas if you ask and we create a conversation and I'm so pleasant and I really want to talk to you and tell you everything you want to know and more, and we create this good connection and bond. But if you come with the, oh, you're from South Africa, do you have an elephant in your backyard? That completely annihilates the conversation. So I have learned in my experience that asking questions is way better than bringing an assumption that is most likely going to make you look ignorant.
Yeah, and I think that's what you were talking about before, is be inquisitive is probably another element to this idea of communication then, right? We were talking about the what are the things we need to do as far as intercultural communication is concerned, is to ask questions, be inquisitive, and don't go into it with assumptions, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a wonderful point. That's a wonderful point.
Yeah, that's based on experience. All right. So now when you were talking about the TV and film industry, and I asked you earlier about storytelling, one of the things on this podcast we like to focus on is storytelling, because when you've given tons of keynote speeches, I'm sure. What are some elements that are important that go into storytelling?
There are several things. First of all, I think you need, and as I said before, educating yourself on film, specifically if you're talking about film. Make sure that you watch movies, right? Make sure that you watch films and have a good understanding of them, and going into it with, again, an open-mindedness, and even films that you may not like. Like I tell my students, there's a director that I can't stand. His name is David Lynch. I'm sure he's a nice fellow, but I don't like his work very much, right?
Can you name one or two movies he's directed? Let me see if I know his
work. He directed, I liked Eraserhead, but he's directed Blue Velvet, which is one of his more famous films.
I've heard of it.
Elephant Man, movie called Lost Highway, and what ended up, he's kind of a surrealist director, but he tries to be marketable, and it kind of bugs me a little bit. There's a self-indulgence there that kind of bothers me. But with that said, I tell my students I pretty much watched every one of David Lynch's movies, and the reason why is because I want to know why I dislike it. Right? The fact is that we need to embrace everything when it comes to that. You don't want to just provide, you don't want to just watch things that you love and enjoy, right? You want to watch things that kind of irk you.
And that's a weakness of mine. Oh. If I'm with friends and they watch a genre I'm not interested in, I'm like, I'll see you guys later. I should be open-minded enough to watch it if I don't like it.
Yeah, no. Listen, it's about, we had a little bit of a discussion about the idea of critical thinking, right? And so with critical thinking, or creating an argument, there's this book called The Transition to College Writing, and the writer Keith Georgeshow talks about the idea of how we need to suspend judgment when it comes to critical and analytical thinking, right? And so from my perspective, I can separate it. I tell my students, like, for example, if I'm teaching a class on Martin Scorsese, I have to show Taxi Driver, right? I have to show the movie Taxi Driver. There's no getting around it from my perspective. I hate Taxi Driver. I hate the film. And it's because it's a dark, really deep, dark movie that is just so nihilistic. It's awful.
Good percentage of his movies are dark. Sorry, Martin. Yeah. Carry on.
Yes, but Taxi Driver beats them all, from my perspective. But with that said, I still have to show Taxi Driver and show how brilliant it is, because it's a brilliant piece of work, right? There's no doubt about that. So I think that's one thing, is the idea of embracing, if you want to become a better storyteller, you have to read and watch stories, and get a sense of that. I think also using your personal experience is very important. Uh, Write what you know is another kind of cliche, but I think it works. I think it's a workable thing. Writing what you know is key.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think, I guess the other thing is have a good understanding of structure, plot, and that sort of thing. You don't have to be, you don't have to go to film school to be a good filmmaker. You know, um, just know that for those who are listening here, if you want to become a filmmaker, you know, in a lot of ways, a lot of people are already filmmakers. If you think about TikTok videos and YouTube videos and stuff,
Yes.
there's a lot of it's amateur work, but at the same time, if you get 1.5 million views on something that you did, then
Something
there's a model of
resonated
success
with
there.
people. Mm, mm.
Yeah, exactly. And that may be another aspect of good storytelling, is being able to resonate with people, right? I mean, I think
Mm-hmm.
that's significant. Know your audience is probably an important element to that as well. Yeah.
Right. My favorites for those who make home videos is when they put on this the different personas. Maybe the person who play the
Oh,
mom,
like three
and
different
he's this
people.
yeah, three different people, and they change outfits, and I'm like, this is brilliant, and they create this realistic situation we can all relate to. I remember a quick one. How when you have a leftover, let's say you had a pizza last night and you didn't finish it, you put it in the fridge, you go to
Yes.
work the next morning, you think about it, not even that you're obsessed with that particular food, but it's just the fact that it's a leftover, and when you microwave it, it tastes better than originally when you had it.
Yes. Right.
You think about your leftover. So this guy where I don't know in other cultures, but back home in South Africa, the mom eats the left, and he actually he bites the burger once to prove that while it's in the fridge, it's his. The mom eats the burger while she's home. He comes home,
Uh-huh.
he goes straight for his burger in the fridge, and it's gone. And he asks his mom what happened to the burger, and she says, in whose refrigerator was the burger? Yours, mommy.
Uh,
Who pays for the electricity to keep the refrigerator? You know what I mean? And everybody can relate to that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I think that is what, what good storytelling is. If you can relate, if you could do something that's relatable to everybody on some
Mm-hmm.
level, I think that is significant. I think that's important. As I said, knowing your audience is so very important
Mm.
when it comes to that. So yeah, I think that's very amusing. And uh, comedy in and of itself is very subjective, right? So you may find that funny, someone else may not necessarily find that funny, but they're going to find this other thing funny.
Yes.
We got to also remember that filmmaking in and of itself is a form of communication. It's a visual form of communication. It has its own language. And so I think that that's significant to recognize too. And you have to be careful. Maybe that's another aspect of filmmaking and narrative, is just be aware of how powerful a message that can provide or give to people, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to be aware of that component of it too, that it's a powerful tool. And, seeing it from the perspective of, you know, bringing up Nazi Germany, thinking about propaganda and how powerful a tool Leni Riefenstahl, uh, you know, creating Triumph of the Will and Olympia and stuff like that, where, it
Mm.
it could create this very powerful sort of, it's a very powerful communicative device. Let's just say that from my
Right.
perspective.
Right. Is there any story when you give your keynotes? Is there any story that you find is very popular with your audiences that you share?
Um, I'm not. Most of my work, I'm going to be, for the sake of full disclosure, I don't do keynote speeches.
Oh, okay.
I do presentations, and I've spoken at conferences, but I've never provided the keynote. I want to make sure that I'm not presenting myself in such a way that
Right.
I don't want to
The
overinflate my ego.
communication,
But
yes. Mm.
yeah, I have to make sure that but I would say that my work is very interdisciplinary, and I'm kind of a generalist, so I kind of jump around quite a bit. So how they enjoy it or not, I'm not necessarily sure. But whenever I do write a presentation
Mm.
or a conference presentation, I do try to tell a story, but also provide theoretical concepts that I think can be kind of connected to their everyday world, I suppose you could say.
Right.
Um, I try to make it less less academic, if that's some way. Does that
Mm-hmm.
make sense?
Yeah, so
That
that it's not too technical and people
right.
cannot see themselves in the scenario. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I remember years ago, I had a professor years ago at Brooklyn College, and he was a very famous film writer, like film book writer. And I remember in classes, he would just, some of the things he would say, I couldn't catch, right? I just didn't understand it. At the time, I didn't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
But his books were so easily accessible, right? And I walked up to him one day and I said, listen, I have to ask you, why is it that you teach the classes that you teach like you do? And then write in a very simplistic, he says, well, it's more marketable that way, right? And
Mm.
that's the reason why, right? Uh, so in the classroom, you're expected to be more academic. And when you're creating something that is meant for the masses to read, you have to be a little less academic in the way that you word things.
Right.
So
So they can
yeah,
understand.
right. I'm not saying that. I'm
Mhm.
not saying that the general public couldn't understand that stuff either. I'm just saying that 9 times out of 10, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't want to place a stereotype on particular individuals who are out there. There's a possibility that they would understand it, but if you're going to make some money off of it, you know what you need to do is make it accessible to all.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you
Wider
know,
reach of audiences. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And then we were talking about digital empathy earlier.
right, right.
All right. So now let's tackle the first thing. The question on most people's minds lately is, why are we so quick to just get on our keyboards and just type whatever comes to your mind? Because let's think about it. In real life, even if you fight with someone, you don't tell them everything that's on your mind. Some things you hold back because you're thinking, if I say this, there's no going back.
Yes, right.
Why do we not have that filter when it comes to just typing stuff on Twitter and commenting and replying to comments?
What, from my perspective, is social media has created this monster, I suppose you could say, in that years ago, if we were to put out some form of insult or something like that on Twitter, there was an anonymity that was connected to it, right? So a person could say something on Twitter or Facebook or whatever the case may, or whatever social media platform was out there,
Mm.
and then walk the streets without anyone knowing that they said it. What happened was, I think we feel that we are somewhat entitled now, on some level. We have our freedoms in this country, specifically. Uh, I'm talking more about America specifically. Now, in other countries that would be different, but here specifically, we have this freedom of speech. So what happens is now it's transferred out into the streets, right?
Mm.
Uh, we don't have that anonymity anymore. In fact, we don't want to have that anonymity anymore. We would rather just express ourselves the way that we want to express ourselves, and then we tell people, well, that's my prerogative to do that. It's like, but no, no, we need to stop this and understand that there should be a filter that's connected to this. We need to find ways to filter out all that stuff. And I think we've lost the art of rhetoric. right? The art of persuasion. I always tell students, if you ever want to watch a good debate, watch Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. Watch those three debates
Mm-hmm.
because those are two great rhetoricians going at it. And the the difference is so minimal as to how it plays out and who wins those particular debates. I remember watching that and hearing Mitt Romney say, if you remember, he goes, a binder full of women.
Oh,
He said, if you
binders,
remember that,
yes, the 47, yes,
a
binders
binder
full
full
of
of women.
women. Yeah, when they
And I
asked him
read
about
that
Bain and Company, if it had a female staff of, I can't remember the percentage. Yes.
exactly right. And I
Mm.
said to myself, he's done. I said, it's like those moments when people say things just in the wrong way.
Mm.
Um, then I say, watch that debate, and then watch Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, or watch Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and tell me that we still have an art of persuasion, right? There's an art form, a process behind it. It's not like that anymore. We don't have those processes anymore. It's reactionary.
It's
And
interesting you bring that up because now I'm wondering, is that how everything filters up from going to the bottom, where people people just follow their leaders in general. They may not do it even consciously, but that's why
mhm,
we say leaders set the example and then the rest of the country follows. Do you think, yes, when you talk about those later debates, that's what people are following and becoming more, and that's why we see more and more of that on social media, people not knowing how to have a healthy debate on a disagreement.
right. I think that's true. I think there's a level of truth to that. And I think the reason why that's the case is social media has created that we could say, if we have one line of 140 characters and we could get our point across, as opposed to really kind of looking at things in a well-rounded way, right?
Mm.
There's no well-roundedness anymore. It's just like, okay, I tell my students this a lot all the time too. I know I say that a lot, so but I tell my students, listen, it amazes me how World War III could be created by 140 characters, right? The concept of how the world has changed. It's no longer about conversation or discussion or comprehensive understanding of things. It's like, no, 120 characters, 140 characters, one sentence, it could change everything. And social media has
Wow.
created that problem. I mean, that's just from my understanding of things. But
No, I
so,
fully agree with you on that. And speaking of social media, so today, Queen Elizabeth has passed away.
yes.
And I don't know if you've checked your Twitter in the last few hours, but the trending hashtag is Go Home Meghan Markle. And okay, so that is surprise. Um,
Eh,
I'm not taking sides, no matter which way you feel about her, and since marrying Prince Harry and how things have transitioned and they are moved to the US and what has transpired since then. The fact that's why I was asking, the fact that you can sit at home, really hate on someone, and not just that, but take the time to do
right.
to put your fingers on the keyboard and say, wait a minute, I really want to tell the world how much I hate this person and it's oozing out of my pores. We've come, it I don't know. I don't know what it's doing to us as a civilization, to our mental health, just overall, what is going on? Why are we so angry?
Well, um, why are we so angry? That's a great question. And to be honest, I think we're angry because we're seeing more than we used to see. I think maybe that plays a role in it. Like, for example, I think about like George Floyd, right? We
Yeah.
see we see the video of him being murdered, right? We
So,
see that.
mm.
And as terrible as social media can be, it is also can provide justice in some ways too, right? Catching that moment and seeing that take place.
Mm-hmm.
How is it that how is it, and maybe the other question is, how is it that we're not, how is it someone that isn't angry? Like the idea of having emotion is so significant. And we see George Floyd being murdered on camera. And from my perspective, we should be angry, right? I mean, and that we should be angry at that. That shouldn't be something that,
You're
should be
apathetic
happening.
about. Mm.
Right. Well, that's the thing too, right? And I think that's what it is. I kind of like, in some way, I say I can work with people who are angry because at least there's an agenda and emotion behind it.
Yes.
You could actually have discussions and be passionate about something, as opposed to just not caring. I mean, I mean that's where the problem really lies. So I think the reason why we're angry is that we're seeing a lot more things that we didn't see in the past, things that weren't
Mm-hmm.
exposed or were hidden, um, but in a way that's also helpful, and learning, more about the systemic problems that we have,
Right. Wouldn't you say
around us.
people who choose not to see are protecting their mental health and their sanity? Because it's a lot, it's too much.
Well, I think the mental health aspect of things, that we talk about social media platforms and the way that the individuals, bully other people and that sort of thing, right?
Mm.
Um, and I think that that's terrible and that's horrible. And as I said, it gives people more access. Like back in the old days, if you were bullied, it wasn't consistent. You could go home and you could, play your video games, relax, and hang out with your parents or hang out with friends or whatever the case may be. And it wasn't something that was just a barrage,
Yeah.
uh, a barrage of those sorts of things. And now that we have social media and we're constantly on the phone and constantly on our social media platforms, what ends up happening is that it doesn't stop. It's a never ending saga of vitriol, and hatred.
Mm.
And how could anyone survive? How could anyone be sane if that's the case? I mean, it's almost an impossibility.
Mm.
So I think that plays a role in it too, as you were saying. I think, and it's again that, consistency over and over and over again. It's
Do you
like it's
think,
like
sorry, go
it's
ahead.
like being beaten with. Sorry, I was going to say it's like being beaten with a bat. You know, every minute of every day for the rest of your life. I mean, you know, I think that's a problem.
Maybe we should remember that these things, even if you delete them, they stay in the cloud forever. Maybe you might want to think twice before you type something on the keyboard.
Well, we live in an Orwellian world now. Big Brother is always watching,
Mm.
and the fact is that the camera is always on, and so you know that's the other thing too. The only question is there accountability? Is there going to be accountability for or ramifications for the problems that are taking place? When are we going to stop, blaming the victims, or
Mm-hmm.
and when are we going to start really putting emphasis on accountability? I think it's important, especially when we're talking with
Yes.
one another. Especially when we're talking with one another.
There really should be accountability, and maybe most people will think twice before spreading the vitriol. Yeah. And
Exactly.
Jimmy Kimmel,
Hmm.
right? He has this mean tweets segment on his show where he will call in celebrities to read mean tweets directed at them. So imagine
Right.
somebody said, Denzel Washington, your head looks like a potato sack, or whatever it is, right? And they
Yeah.
read
Right.
it themselves. I always ask myself, wait a minute, do people really sit on their keyboards and hate on someone and really take the time to do that? Or is it this argument of, listen, they're celebrities, they got hundreds and millions of dollars, they don't care, they don't have, it's not going to hurt them. It's unlike us who have real problems, as people say.
Yeah. No, I think that celebrities have problems, and I think perception is reality, and I think that most people who think that they have problems do have a problem. If they think they have a problem, then there is a problem. Now, every problem is going to be different from everybody else's problem. There's no doubt about that. My problem is going to be very different than, you know, Kanye West's problems, and
for sure,
Meghan Markle's problems, and
yeah.
So I understand that component of it, but a problem is a problem, and as I said, perception is reality. So if that person has this perception that they do have something that's serious going on, we need to take it seriously, and that's another component of this. We don't necessarily take things seriously anymore. I mean, the idea of someone getting abused regularly, and then you have no ramifications for that, and what happens? That person is suffering in silence, and maybe that's another reason why we have these sorts of issues, right? The idea of suffering in silence is too toxic for us. So what we do is we need a form of escapism to get out of that sort of thing. And, the only way to do that is maybe bully somebody else. And
so we're just renting and throwing our toys out of the cart.
Yeah, right. And I think we're getting into dangerous territory. We really are. We have to be very careful of that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm. So before we go, Doug, please tell us just your last words of wisdom when it comes to communication and how we deal with each other nowadays.
I find your wording very fascinating. You say how we deal with one another. I think we have to move away from that sort of wording, right? The idea of not dealing with one another. I think we need to start to listen to one another, have conversations, have discussions, work with people. My wife likes to say, meet them where they are. And I think that's what we need to do. There's a part of me that says we have to get back to the fundamentals. I think we're living in a very complicated world right now. And I think that if we can get to a place where we're kind of back to the basics, I think we could start to build off of that once again. Is that an impossibility? Maybe. But I'm going to be hopeful about it. Why not?
Start the dialogue. Yeah.
That's right. Start the dialogue. Absolutely.
This has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, Roberta, thank you very much. It was an absolute pleasure as well. I'm very happy to meet you and to speak with you. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Happy to meet you too. And before you go, would you like our listeners, if they want to continue this conversation with you, would you like them to reach you on social media?
The funny part about it is you had mentioned my Twitter account. I actually don't have one. I tell my students oftentimes it's better as a professor not to have those sorts of things, because what ends up happening is you start to have problems, right? So the best way to contact me if you wish to have a discussion with me is through my email account, which was MacLeod, MacLeodc @cobleskill.edu.
Okay, I will write that on the show notes. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that would be great.
Yes. So if anybody wants to continue the discussion with Doug MacLeod, I will write his email address on the show notes, and we can talk more about communication, digital empathy, and intercultural communications. Thank you so much. Don't forget to subscribe, give a rating and a review. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Roberta. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
You too.